on www.worldcoffeealliance.com, and you can check them after the webinar. So our distinguished panel members include Vanúsia Nogueira, who is the Executive Director of Brazil Specialty Coffee Association, BSCA. Vanúsia, bem-vinda. Do you want to say hello?
Hello to everyone.
Thank you. Obrigado. Okay. Our next panel speaker is Giacomo Celi, Sustainability Director of the Mercon Coffee Group. Giacomo, benvenuto. Would you like to say hello?
Hello, everybody.
Grazie, grazie. Our next panel member is Karen Attman, founder and CEO of Latin American Coffee Academy from Colombia. Buenos dias, Señora Attman. Would you like to say hello, Karen?
Buenos dias. Hello to everybody.
Fantastic. And our next speaker is Michelle Deugd, the sector lead coffee of Rainforest Alliance. Although she is a Dutch national, she now lives in Costa Rica and speaks Spanish as well. Buenas tardes, señora Deugd. ¿Tu gustaría decir hola, por favor?
Yes, thank you. Hello, everybody. Thanks for the invitation. Glad to be here.
Fantastic. And last but not the least, our keynote speaker today, Professor Michael P. Hoffmann, Professor Emeritus, Department of Entomology of Cornell University. You want to say hello, Mike?
Hello, everyone. Good to be here.
Fantastic. Okay. At this stage, we would like to run a poll. And please start voting now, as we will announce the result of this poll at the end of the panel discussion. So it may not be representative of the whole industry, but at least we can get a snapshot so that we can understand exactly where we're at. So the question is, will the specialty coffee survive the threat of climate change? So can I say answer yes or no or not sure? Okay. All right. Let's allow you to vote while we actually go into the panel discussion. All right. Okay. Let's move on while you vote. Okay. I just want to take this opportunity to thank all our panel speakers and all of you who registered to join this conversation today. We have surpassed our 200 registration mark, which is great news. And although I cannot mention everybody, just mention a few of the registrants. We have members of the Rainforest Alliance, the BSCA, Mercon Coffee Group, Latin American Coffee Academy, the Cornell University. I would also like to to acknowledge the presence of Iri Cafe, Dow Egberts, European Cocoa Association, Paul Rook from the BCA, Kona Cafe, Pome Cafe, IWCA of Peru, TechnoServe, Chibo, Caravan, Torban, Anfilo, Ethiopia, Technical Director of the Specialty Coffee Association. Hello, sir. We have the University of Belize Environmental Research Institute, IDH, Bol Cafe, Catholic Relief Services, Technical Advisor to the Prime Minister of Uganda, Mr. John Bosco Burenj, and many more. Okay, so also a special shout out to some countries which have not registered with us before. We have Guatemala. Hello to Campo Alto and Emerald Specialty Coffee, Nicaragua, Uganda, Kenya, Cote d'Ivoire, Mauritius, Bahamas, Ethiopia, UAE, Ecuador, Honduras, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, Tanzania, and Nepal. I hope I've included everybody. So let me introduce our keynote. Professor Michael Hoffmann is Professor Emeritus of the Cornell University Department of Entomology. He is a very passionate climate change advocate. He received his BS degree in ecology from University of Wisconsin, MS entomology from University of Arizona, and PhD in entomology from University of California. He has published climate change articles in popular press, The Hill, Fortune, and USA Today, and writing a book, Our Changing Menu, Climate Change, and the Foods We Love and Need. Please welcome Professor Emeritus Mike Hoffmann. Can we give him applause, please? A quiet applause. Okay. All right, Mike, you got the floor.
Thank you, Joseph. Okay. Always the technology.
Okay, we will try to sort out the presentation of Michael. While we do that, let's see if we can supply. Are you sharing that, Michael?
I am trying. We did this just a few minutes ago.
Okay,
quite
just stop the
successfully.
sharing, and then
Stop
we
it.
can
Wait a
do
minute.
it again. Stop the sharing.
I
All
will.
right. Anyway, Professor Mike Hoffmann is very much into insects. Entomology is about insects. So essentially, he'll be talking about the coffee borers, and also he'll be talking about the threats of the coffee rust, which is very important. So let's try again.
Davis, I apologize. I sincerely apologize. I wonder
Don't
if
worry, don't worry. We'll try to
I've
sort
done
it
this
out.
so many times, and of course,
Okay.
I need to work.
All right. Okay, can you exit? Can you exit again as we try
Stop
this?
share.
Okay. All right, fantastic. All right, Michael, can you try it again and share your screen so that our people can see? We tried this many times and
Yeah.
see. Okay, let's try again.
All right.
Okay, can you close the PPT? Okay. All right. If we cannot sort this out, let's get on and see if we can.
Let me.
Okay, let's do the keynote later on. Let's go for the
Okay.
panel discussion. Okay. All right. Let's move on to the first segment, and we'll try to carry on and see if we can have the presentation of Michael on the particular subject of some of the challenges that the coffee industry has. So let's go for the first segment. So what are some of the natural threats that you face on the special coffee? Okay, let's start with Vanúsia. Vanúsia, 3 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you. Well, we think I will do to you some examples from Brazil. The climate change here in Brazil, it's facing in very unstable rains here in Brazil. Usually we have a lot of rains in the end of the winter and our springtime. This is our springtime now in Brazil. It's from September until December. And this affects directly to the coffee flowering. This year, for example, we are having a lack of raining during this period. And I can say to you that until the end of October, we had a deficit for 200 milliliters of rain, of water in our plantations. And this can influence directly the flowering, the coffee flowering period. And also this will affect in the crop 2021, the quality of the coffee that we will have for that crop. And also we will decrease, we already have some estimations to decrease our crop, the volume of coffee that we will have for next year too. This for us, it's a very real and current example of climate change in our specialty coffee sector here in Brazil.
Okay, that's great. Okay, can we go to Giacomo, please?
Yes, absolutely. Just to well, complement and echo what Vanúsia has been saying, there is a trend in climate change that is bringing particularly temperatures and rainfalls under, let's say, the scrutiny of coffee farming communities. And in addition to that, I would say that on top of the let's say, so-called abiotic stresses, such as temperatures and rainfalls, there are also biotic stresses and Professor Hoffmann will talk about it probably later, which are basically the spread of pests and diseases that are really coming up and scaling up in altitude and in geographies. So these are really threats which we don't really have much technology to face, because unfortunately, usually high quality varieties tend to be a little bit more susceptible. So that's also another problem. And just to add that unfortunately climate change is presenting itself not only in terms of trends and seasonalities, but unfortunately sometimes also in terms of shocks. So we have all seen what happened in Central America in the past month with 2 hurricanes, one after the other, and these, particularly the second one, Iota, has hit very, very seriously coffee communities that are also very specialty coffee communities in Nicaragua, in Guatemala, and Honduras. So on top of that, there is at the moment also a humanitarian crisis happening as a consequence.
Okay, great. Okay, can we go to Karen, please?
Sure. So I'd just like to talk a little bit about Colombia. Definitely Colombia has been very affected by abundant rains, like the whole region. And in Colombia, 299 municipalities have been severely affected by the rains. Unfortunately, I'd like to say that will end now, but the Colombian Coffee Grower Federation already gave the alert that they expect abundant rains throughout through to February. And so it's something that we have to deal with still for some time. As far as pests, definitely like the coffee borer beetle is a difficulty here. In April of this year, the Federation gave the alert that there was a 6% increase in infestations this year over last year. And last year there was an increase over the year before that. And so that's definitely something that we're seeing increasing. As far as coffee leaf rust, perhaps it's less of a difficulty here in Colombia, because about 83% of Colombian coffee farms do have varieties that are more resistant to coffee leaf rust. So right now, it's not as much of a threat as other circumstances with the rains and the odd climate. And one thing is definitely soil erosion. With these abundant rains, then farmers are facing the fact that they have problems with soil erosion. The Federation again recommends creating trenches to direct water flow. Also, this is something you can't do on the spur of the moment, but just in planning, to have other plants on the farm that can help with their root systems, keep soil in place, and help in that way with soil erosion.
Thank you, Karen. Michelle?
Thank you. Yes, and just to reiterate what the previous panelists have already mentioned and put it in like a more broader perspective, it is this overall variability that we are facing in the coffee communities that really affects on off-season flowering, beans in the coffee plantation throughout the whole year, which causes increase, as Karen also said, in coffee berry borer, because their cyclus cannot be interrupted as would normally be the case. You would have production, then there would be a period of no beans on the farm, which would enable the life cycle of the coffee berry borer to break, to have a pause. But this is not happening anymore. Also, the severe effect of the El Niño and La Niña, which is becoming stronger every year, which is causing alternating periods of dry and warm periods, which increases the incidence of insects, and other years or other regions which are extremely humid, increasing the presence of coffee leaf rust or other types of pathogens, really disturbing the natural balance. Then some regions have become just overall much drier, as we see in the dry corridor of Honduras, which is also closely related to deforestation, where there's huge levels of sunshine. And in general, I think we all know that the overall temperatures are increasing, which affects specialty coffee in a very special way, because for us to have this real nice, good quality coffee, those coffees are produced at relative cold temperatures. So in order for us to continue to have those coffee, the producers need to move uphill. And that's also where the forest is. That's where the water basins are for the villages down. So this can really provoke forest clearance. And this needs for all of us to collaborate and to see how we can support the producers to face those circumstances.
Thank you, Michelle. Mike, Professor Mike?
Yes, most everyone's covered the various disasters, but I'll just throw in a couple of why some of this is happening. There's a warmer atmosphere, so we have 7% more water vapor in the atmosphere, and that results in these heavy downpours. Hurricanes are more intense because ocean waters are much warmer. There's more energy there. There's also more energy in a warmer atmosphere. So the weather we see and are being experienced by coffee growers is just more intense. Droughts in the Southwest US, they're having a natural drought, but it's now become a mega drought because of climate change. It's drier and hotter. That drought will last for 30 years. My point in all this is there's a lot of science behind what's happening, and we can, wherever possible, tap that to help the coffee growers.
Thank you, Mike. Short and sweet. Thank you. Okay, so let's go to the second segment of this panel discussion. The question for the second segment is, what are some of the challenges that you see on the ground? And we can include here some of the challenges in terms of global system failures, like, for example, the failure of the price volatility and also the Paris Accord, for example. Or before you answer this question, I have some advanced question which were submitted to us. And this is about, are there good examples of alignment between adaptation and mitigation strategies? This is from Jonathan Doel, Senior Associate of PwC Netherlands. Okay, Vanúsia, you want to answer that, please?
Yes, I'd like to start, Joseph, talking about opportunities, not about challenges. The demand for coffee is still growing. The demand for specialty coffee is still growing very fast, even during the pandemic period that we are facing. And I think this is a very good opportunity for all of us. And I think our sector, yes, will survive. We will have some challenges about that. As Michelle mentioned before, probably the producers will need to move from some areas to other areas to go to the hill, or to go to the tropical areas instead of the equator area, to go to the south of our planet. To manage better this kind of situation. Another point that I think we can use for that, and we already talked about it in some of our previous meetings for this live, it's about replacements. I think some of the producers need to think about to replace, for example, the Arabica coffee to Robusta coffees or to fresh fruits. And they need to find ways to get to have a good life and to get a good income for them, for their families. And I think this is real possible. And for me, the key word on this is adaptation. We are in a year that we need to adapt everything in our life. And it's not different with our sector.
Thank you, Vanúsia. Okay, Giacomo.
Well, to the same exact question. I think I can only echo Vanúsia. That let's say the opportunities are big. We have massive investments to be done in the coffee communities. So let's say adaptation comes at a price. the technology is often available to face these climatic challenges, but there is investment to be done in transferring this technology to the ground. But in other cases, there's a lot of work to be done to develop new technology. Unfortunately, coffee is quite under-researched as a commodity. It's probably one of the last of the train. And really, you need to be in front of the train in order, in terms of research and development, in order to face those challenges. And let's say there's a lot to be done on genetic improvement. So there are opportunities, but we all need to recognize that there's an investment to be made.
Thank you, Giacomo. Okay, Karen?
Yes, and just to add to the comments that have already been made, one way that I have seen that's kind of trending in Colombia, that coffee farmers have been trying to adapt a bit, is through different kinds of fermentation processes. Because one of the threats of higher temperatures is that they won't have the spectacular tastes in the cup, which is what is going to hopefully get them higher prices when they go to sell their coffee. And so something that I've been hearing a lot of people talking about, and I see coffee growers experimenting with, is the idea of processes, fermentation processes. And it can be as simple as extending the fermentation processes beyond what they usually do, or experimenting with things that are completely different. So it's carbonic maceration, anaerobic fermentation, adding things to the process. So whether it's adding different kinds of fruits or coffee cherries or sugar, salt, whatever, to the fermentation process in an attempt to get more complex flavors or different flavors. And it's something that's, as I mentioned, trending here in Colombia, especially over the last maybe 5 years, we've been seeing a lot of that. Whether or not that's successful, I would like to talk a little bit about that maybe a little further on, maybe with the next question. But it is something that I see a trend towards, and it is something that, different than what everybody else has mentioned. It's something that farmers can at least make their own attempt with, since they can't influence science, perhaps, but they can influence the science that goes on in their farm.
Thank you, Karen. Michelle?
Yes, thank you. So to build on that, so we need to support producers in facing the challenge of their farms, of unstable situations. So really helping them to become more resilient, enabling them to manage all these pests and diseases, the increase of investments that we have seen also in responding to the previous question. That's a huge challenge and will be a challenge and will require investigation in new varieties, as Giacomo also mentioned, and also in sustainable integrated pest management approaches. Then I think that the overall challenge of avoiding deforestation is also a big one, which we need to address, and we need to work together as a sector and at landscape level to see how we can do that. So those are some of the challenges that I see besides the one already mentioned, and the way how to approach them or how to attack them. I think that's something we will discuss in the next question.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Professor Michael?
Yes, I'd like to take a more global view and some positive news, and also pick up on Vanúsia's more optimistic view and hope. We have a new president. We'll rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. I think that gives us hope. But I think another thing to do is there a way to take the passion people have about coffee and use it to the benefit of the industry by helping them talk about climate change and what it means to this cherished beverage in coffee houses? The number one thing to actually start to engage people in climate change is simply talk about it. In the US, very few people even talk about it. So can we start this conversation around coffee change with the potential benefit from the consumer back to the farmer?
Okay, thank you, Michael. Okay, we've now move on. We're moving very quickly. Let's tackle now the segment 3 question. Before I start the segment 3 question, I would like to mention some of the few questions in advance so that you can incorporate this in your answer. We have a question from Ron Kleist, who is the president of Vortex Clean Air Systems, Incorporated in the USA. Where can the biggest gains be made in reducing the carbon footprint of coffee and specialty coffee roasting? And also we have a question on the technology and what role do you believe technology will take in shaping a more sustainable future of coffee? So the third segment, let's get the segment 3 PPT so that we can actually say about what is or how can we develop, this is the question, how can we develop a more robust and sustainable specialty coffee sector? In other words, what are some of the solutions that we might be able to see to apply to the sector in order to move it forward or perhaps to delay the threats of climate change? Vanúsia?
Yes, I'd like to link here some of the points that Giacomo said to us and also Professor Mike said to us too. For me, for this point specifically, we have some keywords: research, technology, innovation, and new generation. The new generation, it's the generation that has in their mindsets the view and the sensitive for climate change. The younger people, the teenager people, this is the people that it's really concerned about this, and they are very sensitive for that. Additionally on that, they are very motivated about innovation, about technology, about applications of new results. And I think we need to join all of the things and create some pilots or some examples to show to the world and to do kinds of benchmark about that for any more vulnerable groups, and to find the way to support and to help them to manage the climate change in the coffee sector. Not only to say they are a poor people and they will still be a poor people, or they don't have another chance, or they don't have another opportunity, or they don't have another alternative. No, everybody has. And we need to follow this, we need to address this. I agree with Giacomo when he says that in research, in technology, we are in the end of all the priorities that we have. But we have very good examples. We have very good examples about research in coffee here in Brazil. We have very good examples about research in coffee in Vietnam. And we have, for example, I'm a representative of Brazil in the World Coffee Producers Forum. And Professor Jeff Sachs prepared a very good report about this for us. And he showed to all of us that we have many examples in Brazil and in Vietnam that all the other countries, all the other producer countries, they can explore this. And we are totally open to support on this process. And I know that Vietnam, it's also agreed, the coffee sector in Vietnam also agreed to do a benchmark to the other countries. And let's use this, why not?
Okay, great. Before I call on Giacomo, there's some comments from the audience. From Francesca Nunez, very good point, Giacomo. We need more investments in R&D to make technologies more accessible. Thanks to all for your interesting interventions. Okay, let's go for Giacomo, please.
Well, it's a big question, and I agree with Vanúsia. I mean, Brazil, Vietnam, and also Colombia have made and are probably the only three examples of countries that has created and established a strong R&D platform for coffee. And you can see that as a result over the past 25 years, these origins have conquered market shares and are now obviously far more relevant and far more important than they were in the past. Now, this is while we are closing to these three origins for having really addressed their sectors and governments and private society having worked together to address. On the other side, we cannot forget that this industry is thriving, and the specialties is the tip of the iceberg because of the diversity. So if we are keeping having three origins continuing their ramping up in market share, this will cause blends of specialty micro roasters and up to large players to have very similar taste profiles, and that will just make coffee a boring drink, which is absolutely not now. So it's not, it will only be seen as a source of caffeine. So an energizing drink that could be easily substituted by energy drinks. So we know that caffeine is a natural source of energy, but we have taurine, for example, and we have multi-million companies having built their fortune on synthetic energizers. So this is not answering the question because I know that everybody will anyway add points, but here what I'm saying is to develop, we need to think a little bit more systemic. I know there's a lot of competitive issues among origins, among players, but we need to really lay the foundation for a pre-competitive agenda that will address fundamental lack of resources for the sector, and that should come as a combination of public and private funding.
Okay, thank you, Giacomo. Before I ask Karen for this question, there's a question for you from one of your members. Coffees with additional processes which take more time, resources, and investment, will this be included in the price of coffee? As we know, there's always a question of the price volatility. Can you answer that, Karen? Karen?
I'm sorry. So you want
well,
you want me to?
Yeah, well, if you can incorporate it in your answer, that would be perfect. Thank you.
Sure. So with thinking about this big question, and the answer to it is very complicated, obviously, of how the specialty coffee industry can adapt. I just want to give an answer that can seem very small, and it's an answer about specific farms that have seen improvements because they have changed their processes. And so just to take it to Colombia, there's a farm that's very well known. It's called La Palma y el Tucán. And so they have produced amazing coffees that have been used for a lot of world championships, they're selling amazing specialty coffee. And one of the ways that they do that, so they do play around varieties, but they also are working with processes. So the coffee that was used in the last World Barista Championship and that won, helped the Korean participant to win the first place, was coffee that did go through a special fermentation process. It was an anaerobic fermentation process. And that process, what it did was it created a sweeter coffee and a coffee with more impressive body. Now, I know that most consumers don't really care about anaerobic fermentation or carbonic maceration, but they do care about how the coffee tastes, if it's sweet, if it has good body. And so the success of this kind of farm shows that through the fermentation processes, then a more pleasant coffee can be created. And of course, that farm is not your typical Colombian coffee farm by any means. But a lot of farms are starting to experiment with these processes that can change the results in the cup. And I think something that's interesting is that coffees that are considered to be lower quality because of the varieties or because of the altitude at the farm that they're grown at, they can still take those coffees and with a different fermentation process, create coffees that are amazing. Just an example of it that's well known was also from the last year's World Barista Championship. The gentleman who represented Switzerland in that competition, he placed 6th in the competition, and he used coffees that he said, hey, these are not amazing. These are not spectacular coffees. The variety is not spectacular. The altitude is not, but the processes were. And so they used anaerobic fermentation and carbonic maceration to get coffees with chocolate, like cacao nib notes and winey notes. And so there's spectacular coffees, but not because of varieties, which can be hard to grow, as was mentioned, or altitudes that a farmer can't just go up the mountain. Maybe the coffee farm that they have is at the top of the mountain already. So that's not a viable solution for a lot of people, but maybe playing around with longer fermentation times can help some farmers. And I have a lot of experiences with that. What I've mentioned are more famous people, just because it's something that's easy to look on internet and find that information. But I have a lot of information about smaller coffee farms in talking with roasters and exporters here in Colombia who are working with regular coffee farmers that don't have a lot of resources and do not need to invest in special machinery, special equipment. All they need is a grain pro bag. All they need is the time to spend on a longer fermentation to take care with the processes. That doesn't require money. It does require resources because it's time and human resources, but it's ways that can benefit even more like average coffee growers. Now, there is also the question of how do they get that education? And that's something that a lot of work will need to be done because, for instance, here in Colombia, it's not easy for farmers to get this information about how to improve fermentation processes. And so they rely on what they hear from other farmers or maybe what an exporter or a roaster can help them with. But that can result in a lot of mistakes and a lot of resources that are lost. So there's definitely a need for education so that coffee growers can experiment, but they can do it in a way that won't create loss for them in the process while they learn and while they see if there's a market for this.
Okay, thank you, Karen. That was interesting. Michelle, would you like to get on with the conversation, please?
Sure, thanks. Yes, that was super interesting, Karen. Thanks for that. So I think in order to respond to this question on how we can develop a robust and sustainable specialty coffee sector, we need to look at the level of the farm and beyond the level of the farm. So looking at the farm, it's important that we support producers, as I previously mentioned, in becoming more resilient. And the first step in that is this introduction and use of improved varieties. I think there has been quite some success in research of resistant varieties that also have a good taste and or a better taste. So I think that we need to continue to support that and help them to combine that with practices that improve the resilience of the farm, such as soil protection, the keeping the trees or increasing the tree cover so that the overall microclimate of the farms are healthy. Nevertheless, we also know that we need to beyond the boundaries of the farm at the level of the sector and also the level of the landscape. So at Rainforest Alive, we've been implementing landscape and community level projects, which have really demonstrated the importance of involving at the landscape not only the sector-related partners, but also public partners. We have created in Peru, for example, watershed level working tables where the public sector and the private sector work hand in hand to really create that change, which can only be tackled at the level of the watershed, for example. So at the level of the sector, it's also important that partners are included along the whole supply chain and that we create enabling environment for the producers. Because it's really nice to talk about the introduction of new varieties, but we also know that it's super expensive for the producers. Producers need affordable access to finance, not just access to finance, affordable, because the interest rates are high, the conditions are complicated, and that's something that we as a sector, if we really want to thrive, need to think through and support. The role of youth, as Vanúsia just mentioned, is key. The industry and the producers are becoming older, and that is a real challenge for us, and it will become an increasingly more important challenge over the next decade. So we really need to look that into the eyes. And that's, I think in that sense, we can also link the role of technology, which is something that calls the attention of youth and where the youth can really help us. And how can technology be useful in this context, right? So I think there are different types of technologies that can support the producers on the one hand and the sector as in total on the other hand. For the producers, there are different apps available which can help them to improve the management of the farm. We are currently developing an app which is called the Farm Intelligence app, which can help producers who are certified in this case to understand the practices that they need to improve, and also especially understand which investments have been useful and which not, so that they can take really informed decisions, more business-minded, more management-minded. So that's one of the examples how technology can and is already supporting the producers. Then in the context of this specific question of climate change and the topic we mentioned about deforestation, we see really more and more use of remote sensing and of geo types of apps, which can help us to identify those very susceptible areas for deforestation. Where do we see encroachment of coffee farms, and support producers in finding those spots where they could maybe expand if that's even an option. And then another example is the use of technology to connect producers with consumers. We see that more and more, the use of blockchain. And if we are able to link that to making the consumers conscious about the importance of climate smart agriculture, of regenerative agriculture, we can really, as a sector, trigger that interest and creating additional incentives for producers for them to be able to actually make the investments required to produce in those more resilient manners. And just to close this, there is an important role for the sector, for the supply chain actors to play. If the supply chain actors want to continue, and then I'm referring to the roasters, the retailers, the traders, everybody in the supply chain, if we want to continue to have this specialty coffee, not only today, but also tomorrow, we strongly believe that these actors need to also reinvest back into the producers, back into the supply chain, support producers in making those investments on the farm, which are needed in order for them to face climate change. So we have, in our new standard, introduced a new concept of shared responsibility, which will also explicitly require from the different actors on the supply chain to support producers in making the investments needed for them to become and to stay resilient and productive.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Before I ask Professor Michael, we have a few comments here from Lamin Abdul Malik. I'm really enjoying what Karen is talking about, and I've been impressed with some of the coffees from Colombia of late. So I'm also a fan of macerated and additional fermentation process, and I've enjoyed like this at the time, okay? So basically, Professor Michael, do you want to respond to this question, please?
Sure, and I'll pick up on a comment that Michelle made, and that's connecting the consumers to the producers. I think that's absolutely critical, and it goes back to my comment earlier about using coffee and other foods to raise awareness about climate change and that we need to take action. We're actually hoping to do what's called a messaging experiment. It would be a national survey in the US to get try to measure the intensities of responses from people when you talk about the loss of coffee versus melting glaciers. Everybody kind of knows the non-food side, but if we can bring in the food side, we want to really truly assess how important it would be to really focus on food. That sort of backs up everything. We're making some assumptions and proceeding accordingly. Joseph asked me also to just offer some idea about youth, young farmers. Obviously, around the world that's happening. It's becoming more difficult to farm. But what about encourage them to get engaged in science to help related to coffee? How about developing that technology, being the educators? I think a few more entomologists wouldn't hurt, and we'd have more biological control. I promote that. And lastly, I haven't heard it yet, but as a technology, what about genetic engineering? It may be a very sensitive topic for those who grow coffee, produce coffee, and market coffee, but it is a technology. And as I reviewed the literature and so on the coffee board, it's a really, really difficult pest to manage. So is that a direction to take? And if so, is there an opportunity to again convey the importance of science to the consumer, and that every academic or every scientific organization in the world says the consumption of genetically engineered crops is as safe as those developed using traditional methods. And with gene editing, which is extremely precise, is that an approach? And again, some of this may be underway, but I think it's a technology that certainly ought to be discussed if it isn't so far.
Oh, thank you, Professor Mike. Can I just mention that the World Coffee Research has also come up with a certain breed where it's called Arabusta. So it's a combination of Arabica and Robusta. I don't know if Giacomo has heard about this Arabusta, but it's one of the questions actually that was sent to us in advance. So are there any updates on this? So maybe next time, Giacomo, do you have any idea about this new species or combination that World Coffee Research is working on?
Yeah, so Mercon is sitting on the board of the World Coffee Research, and I am myself involved in the Research Advisory Committee of the World Coffee Research. So as close as we can get to let's say, an update, if you want. The current situation is that we are basically testing these individual plants. So there's still, in coffee, generations needs to pass in order to have validation of the crossing that has happened. But I kind of wanted to bring a little bit of perspective, since we're talking about Arabusta, but that is a consequence of the lack, decrease in resistance being shown by, let's say, the Timor hybrid, the family of hybrid in between Robusta and Arabica that has naturally occurred. So there's a number of Catimors and Salchimors that have been in different generations, have been also introgressed back to Arabica in order to also catch the specialty segment. But also on the genetic, just to also perhaps bring a point from industry to Professor Hoffmann, GMOs have been very much discharged as an idea, as an option by coffee brands. And here is when we're talking about transgenesis. So when you're actually bringing together two species that are not self-compatible from a reproductive point of view. But we also have a problem because we are somehow playing with what we have. We are not designing anything new without entering into the GMO world, but there's a lot of work in breeding that can still be done in coffee, finding the genetic traits and really breeding by so-called breeding by design. So finding a little bit more. So as I say, excluding Brazil that has done it, excluding Vietnam that has done it, nowhere else this has happened. So the work takes time, and instead having better equipped country breeding platforms and having a hub that is capable of speeding up the breeding program, it will be very beneficial. Otherwise, every time we enter into a breeding program, we need to spend about 20 years into that. And not many organizations have that long-term investment horizon to stand that investment for so long, because it's also very risky, obviously.
Okay, thank you, Giacomo. I think we're ready for our keynote, and we'll try again from Professor Michael Hoffmann. Hopefully, we can fix this. And okay, Mike, over to you.
Can you see that?
There you go. But can you start from the beginning? Yeah.
Yes, that would help. I apologize to everyone. We actually practiced this before.
All right.
And,
okay.
There we go.
There you go. Okay. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you for your patience. My PhD in entomology doesn't help at times. So, Joseph asked me to sort of combine a personal message about climate change and also weave in some of the insect pests. So here goes. And I've sort of touched on some of this already, but it's personal when you think of the farmer, the producer, and those of us and those who grow the food in love that we need in love and get it to the table. We need to offer them more respect and support. And maybe I'm speaking from a US perspective because most of us here don't know where the food comes from. But I think that's such an important part of the story to tell, that there's someone out there, whether it's wheat in Kansas or coffee in Costa Rica, that's trying to make a livelihood off of producing something we love. Food is personal. These children get it. Without ice cream, there would be darkness and chaos. I think we agree with that. And melting glaciers are bad enough, but the loss of coffee is downright terrifying to many people. And the world of a coffee plant is changing. We touched on this many times, but there's so many different aspects to this. There's stories behind each one of these. But on the right, that orange surface there, that's the surface of the planet. It's called the troposphere. It's essentially 7 miles high. That's it. That's where all the action occurring. That's where weather occurs, snow falls, and it's climate change. We're just adding more greenhouse gases to that very thin layer, increasing the insulating effect, and it's warming. So back to a plant, increasing CO2 results in faster growth of a larger plant. It actually affects potentially the nutritional content. The global water cycle is changing. Temperatures, yes, it's warming, but nights are warming faster than days and winters faster than summers, which has enormous implications for a lot of our crops. Soil was mentioned already, being washed away and carbon being lost because of higher temperature and increasing pests. The coffee borer. With warmer temperatures, it's maturing much faster. In some locations, historically, there were 4 generations. Now there's 16 per year. More damage, wider dispersal. Currently, about 60% of the world's coffee production area is infested. That will be 80% in 2050. A recent paper on increasing CO2 on young plants finds there's less caffeine in a plant under higher CO2. That could have an effect on the coffee borer. We've talked about, well, we haven't, but integrated pest management. I think we've essentially touched on all of these things, all the approaches to solutions to the coffee borer. Insecticides are commonly used, resistant varieties, biocontrol, etc. There's recent work on antibiotics that affect the gut of the beetle and also repellents. Coffee leaf rust. Again, it's doing much better because of the higher temperatures, more intense rain, more humidity, higher humidity. It can reproduce faster, it's better at infecting leaves, generates and releases more spores, therefore it's dispersing. Again, IPM. Varieties have been touched upon. Fungicides, especially those with copper, are the most effective, but there's maybe better ways to monitor and actually use thresholds. I read one paper where they use a 5% threshold. When they find the infestation is 5%, they spray, but not necessarily on a regular basis, therefore reducing cost, reducing use of fungicides. Some oils are effective. Ecosystem diversity, which I believe has been mentioned already, can help with some diseases such as this. And obviously you want healthy plants. So soil health is really important. Locusts have really raised havoc in Eastern Africa. It's the worst in decades. Part of that is there's more and more intense cyclones from the Indian Ocean because of warmer ocean waters. There's also more tropical storms and heavy rains. And together, this warmth and water enhance breeding grounds, increase plant biomass, and the locusts are more successful. So we have a big problem, but we need a big solution. And I already touched on this. But can we use coffee and other foods to raise awareness and action on climate change? No one has really asked this question in a comprehensive way. And we continue to get feedback that we're onto something. And can we partner across the supply chain, the consumers all the way through to the growers, the restaurateurs, the retailers, chefs, etc. They all have an investment in coffee and other foods. Can we find this common ground such that, again, we raise awareness about climate change such that all parties, because they're all dependent on each other, could benefit? Joseph mentioned in the intro, the book, Our Changing Menu, Climate Change and the Foods We Love and Need, primarily for a US and developed world audience, because we've contributed more to climate change than the rest of the world, and we have capacity to make a difference. But the whole point of the book is to talk about, we literally go through a menu from beverages, distilled spirits at the beginning, salads, main courses, grains, sides, desserts, and coffee. By the way, coffee ends the story, and we talk about what's happening at every point, whether it's olive oil in Spain, avocados in California, grains in Kansas, chocolate in Western Africa. The point is to connect the reader to where the foods come from. It's a celebration of food. Food is part of our culture, part of our history, part of our families. And again, can we use this as a means to help the food industry in general, but in this case, coffee? And finally, our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity and all the vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. Carl Sagan. Thank you.
Okay, can we give Professor Mike an applause, please? Finally, we've come to the end of that presentation. It's fantastic. I hope that the audience will take something out of that presentation. It's a very important issue. Now, obviously, we are on time and just perfect. It's 4 o'clock, so we have 30 minutes of Q&A. So let's start the first question. The first question is from our from Caleb Dengu, managing partner of CDF Trust and Consulting BV in Zimbabwe. Climate change affects rainfall patterns and the quality of coffee berries. How can the coffee industry take advantage of the falling solar power prices to increase investment in the irrigation infrastructure at farm level? And how do you structure the financing of the irrigation infrastructure? Would you like to take that question, Vanúsia, please?
Okay, let's do it. How to finance that? I don't know. I'll be very frank about that. I think there are some points that we need to be careful about irrigation and about the solar power. As we already mentioned here about fermentation, all of these issues, all of these points and procedures require investments. And we need to be very careful about these investments. In our country, for example, the solar power, it's still very expensive to install. And we need to be careful about this. And I think this is one of the points for education management. The app that Michelle mentioned here about the app from Rainforest Alliance has this as one of the key points, the management of the property. And I think this is very important. We need to have a finance strategy to do that. Another point that we need to be very careful about irrigation, it's about the water. Where this water will come from for irrigation. Yes, we need, we will improve the quality, we will include the health of the tree, of the coffee plantation, but we need to be very careful about the water. Here in Brazil, we are facing year by year that in many cities, in many big centers, we don't have water to drink. Then we need to be very responsible for the use of the water. And I think, Professor, this is one of the points that we need to be to take very attention during this period that we are talking about climate change. We have this lack of water or this drought in some areas in the world that we need to manage this also. In order to have water for all the things or the activities that we need.
Okay, thank you, Vanúsia. Okay, Giacomo.
Mercon has a service delivery platform globally, and which is connected to our strategy, and it's called LIFT. Through LIFT, we provide services to farmers. Services depending on each origin we have will have different needs. One of the services, obviously, we have technical assistance, extension service, certification services, community services, renovation services, and we also have two important components, which are microcredit or credit. I will explain a little bit the difference between the different origins. Also we have a price protection mechanism in place for the farmers. So there is attention to their technical capability of our supplying farmers and the financial capability and their financial capability. Obviously, whenever you enter into a financing program with farmers, so for example, we do these directly through our exporting companies, or we do these through we also have a financial arm. So we have a financial company in Nicaragua called Mercapital that provides credit to farmer, both short-term credit and long-term credit. Then we also have partnerships, such as in Brazil with barter schemes. So we can also provide, and this is very popular in Brazil, we can provide either short-term and long-term financing to farmers through partnership with input providers or agrotech companies. And this is what is called a barter scheme. So every country will have a different financing mechanism. So there is not one recipe for every country. What I think is really important here is to stress is that we as Mercon are a global player with an international reputation, with a sophisticated management scheme and management processes, so we can act as a de-risking factor for the financial lenders, because obviously they're financing us, we are financing the farmers. Lenders are usually quite risk adverse, and particularly when talking about more difficult territories with difficult governance structures, lenders are a little bit reluctant to lend money to farmers. So there is a huge hole in the system, a huge gap. Just so you know, we, for example, in Nicaragua, we cover about 15 to 20% of the national demand for credit, but this is, let's say, part of it. We cannot, unfortunately, ourselves cover 100% of the entire demand for credit. So the problem is that what we are not be able to offer as short-term loans and long-term loans at better than market rates. Farmers have to go either through the national banking system, which is for agriculture sometimes not enough and has interest rates that are higher than the international interest rates. So there's obviously more debt that those farmers are building up. Or even worse, they have to go through informal lending. And when I say informal lending, I mean people charging up to 40% per year interest rate. And this is extortion, honestly. So there is where farmers are entering into vicious cycles of debt. And they most often get trapped into that until they have to give up their farms. So this is the raw reality of facts. So I think in order to finance those investments, you really need to work with a credible counterpart that is also built into a system. So you're not financing a farmer just out of the blue. You're working in technical assistance, you have a farm business plan. So you are, what has been told before as well, you're making this farmer a better entrepreneur so that you can finance, and the risk you take is lower because you know and you work hand in hand with the farmer.
Okay, Giacomo, thank you very much. Before I ask Karen to answer that question, can I just mention that our next webinar, if I may, is in February 2021. It will be talking about accessing coffee finance. So we're going to be inviting banks and all that, and those farmers who are in need of financing can attend that webinar. But I thought I'll plug the next webinar at this stage. Okay. All right, Karen, what do you think about that question?
Well, as far as the investments that need to be made on farms, that is obviously a big topic. And one thing that I like that Giacomo mentioned was that it's not just about the money that they have access to, because obviously anybody in any sector, if they are simply receive money, but they don't receive the training of what to do with that money, how to plan their investments, how to track their investments, understand what's working, as has been already mentioned, and what can work for them, then it wouldn't matter what investments they could have incoming into their farm. And so that is a huge job of education with the coffee farmers to get them to understand what's even realistic for their farms. Let me just go back to that idea of fermentation processes. Sometimes a farmer just says, no, if I do something with fermentation, my coffee will be amazing and everybody will buy it. Well, that's not the reality. And so that's where education is needed, so that a farmer can realistically look at their farm, look at what they're already doing, can see what a partial improvement is, maybe baby steps or the first steps that they can take to reduce risk for them, see what plan they can come up with that will be practical for their farm, and then see what investments need to be made. So I think that is incredibly important to start with education, then the financing, and then the education has to accompany the financing along the way.
Okay, Karen, thank you very much. Okay, can we go to Michelle, please?
Sure. So yeah, I think very long and extensive explanations have already been made. And I really also agree with Karen. We need to connect the dots, not just enable, bring the finance to the producers, but also make sure that they can use it properly. And even before finance is received, we need to support producing in being able to manage the finance properly. So what we've been doing in the past, for example, is working with producers and producer groups to help them to get their even either farm level accounting or cost benefit management up to speed, and also at the level of group management, proper group governance, because a lot of producers work through cooperatives or through independent producer groups. Proper group management, support these groups also to get their financial systems really in order before they receive finance. Train them on internal credit management, for example, to also support them and provide in helping them to bring finance even to the smaller producers. So that all requires collaboration. We have in the past collaborated, for example, with Root Capital. It requires collaboration among all of us so that we really support producers with this topic of finance in a much broader way.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Before I call Professor Mike, there's a comment here from the audience, from Ashok Batra. The app from Rainforest Alliance seems to be the answer. Climate change and water conservation is the need of the hour. And he has a question. Giacomo, are you financing any farmers in Asia, in India? Okay, don't answer that. Okay, we'll answer that privately, okay? All right, okay, Professor Mike?
Just briefly, and I guess I'll state the obvious, that with climate change, water is becoming more and more precious. And in some parts of the world, I'm not sure if this applies for coffee is grown, even groundwater is being overused and over extracted. So I think if irrigation, which sounds like it's a clear approach, it just needs to be done as efficiently as possible. Save the water, conserve the water. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Michael. So we are 4:14. So this is the first time that I feel very strongly that we're going to finish on time, and we have another 10-15 minutes. But all those audience who wanted to write an email to our speakers, you send it to us at info@worldcoffeealliance.com, and we will basically send it to them if they want to respond, like the financing from Giacomo. So we'll write those down and send them to you and forward them. And also, if you have more questions that we cannot tackle on this particular conversation, so basically, we want to make sure that what we do is that we send those questions just like the last time. We have to send them post-webinar to all of the panelists. That's more job for the panelists, I'm afraid. But we do respond to all the questions that you send to us, either advanced or post-webinar. It's one of our jobs to make sure that the conversation keep going. Okay, we have, I think, another round perhaps that we can answer. My question is basically very important. Now, in the bigger scheme of things, I'd like to give you just 1 minute each for you to say exactly your message to the farming community worldwide and what needs to be done in order to delay or stop the threats of climate change to the specialty coffee industry. Okay, everybody has 1 minute to do that. Let's start with Vanúsia.
Well, Joseph, I think we need to be responsible. We need to be responsible for all of our actions as a community, as a producers, as a consumers. And we are talking about food. Coffee is food. And I think the better question that we can have always, it's where this is coming from. and how this is produced.
Okay, thank you, Vanúsia.
Thank you.
Giacomo?
So my message is, don't think about specialty as a segment that is a silos. Don't think that the issues that the specialty segment is going through are exclusive of the specialty segment, and don't think that issues that are impacting are not going back to the entire coffee market. So it's still a niche, but it's a niche that counts a lot.
Okay, thank you. That's short and sweet. Okay, Karen?
I think what I would like to say is that with specialty coffee, what I've seen with a lot of coffee growers is that it can attract a lot of people who dream big, and that's a beautiful thing. But what my call would be for realistic action, which includes education, which should be provided hopefully within the country, a little bit on internet if a coffee grower has access to it. And that while big dreams are wonderful, it's good to go with short baby steps to see what can really be achieved with the circumstances on the farm, and also see who you can partner with to make it a reality. So with specialty coffee, the big dream is to produce it and to get big prices, but you have to be realistic. Talk with roasters, talk with exporters, who's going to be buying your coffee, to see if they're interested in these coffees. How much more are they willing to pay? What are the buyers willing to invest in? What stories do they need from the farm? Maybe they really don't care about fermentation processes, or maybe they don't care about other aspects of the farm. So that's something to be realistic about before you even start to make any changes, such as changing the variety. Like I saw a lot of farms here in Colombia changing to geisha, because geisha was going to make them that big money. It's not happening in Colombia. So I would say that would be my message, a call to be realistic while working towards your dreams.
Oh, thank you, Karen. Michelle?
Yes, thanks. So my response really applies to the whole coffee sector and not just the specialty segment. And it's a bit in line with what Vanúsia said. If we want to face climate change, we all need to take responsibility. It's a shared responsibility of everybody here on this table. So let's make sure that we bring value back to the producers, that we support the producers to face this huge challenge which they are dealing with. In the name for all of us, because we all love our specialty coffee and all our coffee. So let's work together and collaborate.
Oh, thank you. Professor Mike?
Yes, being a bit of a dreamer, but also one that's very practical. I think we need that combination, but I think partnerships are really key along the food chain, new partnerships to support the farmers in the coffee industry and beyond. And also sharing stories from what farmers are experiencing to a broader audience. So in fact, we all more appreciate what they are doing for us to provide us our specialty coffees.
Okay, thank you, Michael. So before we end this webinar, let's announce the result of the poll. Can we have the envelope, please? Wow. Okay. So yes, 67%. No, 7%, not sure, 26%. Well, there is a green shoots of spring, I suppose. So although we face a lot of these problems and threats of climate change, I think if we all act together, I think we might have a winner here in terms of responding to these challenges. So finally, I just want to thank you all, the panel speakers and our audience today. Attendees, and although we cannot solve these problems that we face during the 90 minutes of discussion, I just hope that everybody takes something out of this conversation. At least this could be a start of a very long conversation. And I hope you enjoyed today's webinar. And if you want to suggest more topics for the future webinars, please send it to us on info@worldcoffeealliance.com. We hope to see you again on our next webinar, hopefully. And once again, we would like to thank you and all, of course, the special mention of our co-founder, Mavis, and her technical team that made this webinar very possible. Always stay tuned on our social media channels, especially on LinkedIn, and enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon, and evening. And I just want everybody to stay safe. I know we haven't got the full recovery in terms of COVID-19. And I think this will lock down and all of these barriers to the normal, new normal might be difficult to face, but we hope for the best. And we would like to thank everybody, especially the audience who has given their time, precious time, to be able to join this conversation. And I would like to thank all of these brilliant speakers and panelists. And I just hope that we can invite you again. I think we deserve all a clap and applause. Let's clap ourselves, basically. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, and that's the end of this webinar. And we just hope that we can continue this conversation in some future events. And we would like to thank all of you that attended this webinar. So that's the end of this webinar. And thank you very much again. We finished on time. In fact, early on time. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe.
You too.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Mike, Professor Karen.